right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Aqui. I'm the medical director of the apheresis collection facility at the University of Pennsylvania. I guess a little bit about me. I went to med school at Penn. My CV is very short. I went to med school at Penn. I did residency at Penn. I did my postdoc at Penn in Carl June's lab, and then I did a fellowship in transfusion medicine. And stayed on as faculty, and now I'm the director of the residency program. So Penn is basically my entire resume. What I'm going to talk about today is give you a little bit of history on how cellular therapy kind of developed at Penn and where we've taken it, a little bit about our partnership with industry, and kind of how we see this going forward. So a couple disclosures. These aren't the types of disclosures you're probably used to seeing. One, I don't have an MBA. I'm just a doctor. So if your questions are very business oriented, I don't think I'm going to be able to help. And two, I'm not an expert in contract negotiations either. So what I'm going to be telling you is based on personal experience and my opinion, and which may or may not be fact. All right, so a little bit of a timeline on CAR T therapy. I'm sure most of you in this room are very well aware of how CAR therapy was developed. T-cell engineering obviously is not a new thing. When I joined Carl's lab in 2003, they already had clinical trials in T-cell engineering, really for HIV prevention. So this isn't new. However, from the time that the first successful CAR T patient was treated in 2011 to the time that the first FDA approval, that is a very short time span. So if we focus on this, that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2011, and this was a report of one patient who received CAR T therapy. And it made a lot of noise and people were very excited. But what you may not realize, and a lot of people don't realize, is 3 patients with CLL were treated with CAR T therapy in 2010, 2011. And then that was it. And the reason was we didn't have any money. So nobody would fund it. NIH wasn't interested in funding it. Industry wasn't interested in funding it at the time. So we treated 3 patients and then we just stopped because we ran out of money. Personalized cellular therapy is obviously a very expensive thing. And so we were like, okay, these patients have been treated and that's it. And the interest waned a little bit. And then, I'm sure you're all familiar with Emma Whitehead, or Emily Whitehead, was treated at CHOP. And her story got a lot of press because, frankly, people care a lot about kids and not as much about adults, and that's fine. They should care about kids. And so the success of her therapy is really what I think has moved us forward and has really revved up interest in CAR T therapy. So what does it take to bring CAR T therapy to market? So as I said, we ran out of money after 3 patients. So there's target discovery. So what is the antigen of interest? And then there's preclinical studies, an IND filing, phase 1, phase 2 studies, and all of that takes a lot of money. And many academic centers just aren't in a place to fund this on their own. And that's where the Penn-Novartis alliance came in. So there was a little bit of a bidding war because Penn did have experience in cellular therapy, and so we were somewhat of a known entity when it came time to license this next kind of phase in cellular therapy. And we also had a GMP grade product at that time. Now, mind you, that GMP grade product was made in a lab that's smaller than this stage. It was probably maybe half the size of the stage. We had 2 hoods. It was a very mom and pop type of facility, but we operated under GMP guidelines. And so with the Novartis alliance, what that allowed us to do was a lot of different things. So the alliance went into effect in August of 2012. And the goal was to develop and commercialize CAR T therapy. And what Penn did was grant Novartis exclusive rights, global exclusive rights, to CART-19, which again had already been developed and used to treat patients with CLL, and any additional CAR T therapy that came out of that alliance. There were additional milestone and royalty payments that were part of the agreement, and Novartis contributed $20 million to building the Center for Advanced Cellular Therapy. So if we go back 5 years, this is what the commercial landscape looked like in 2015. So again, in 2012 was the Penn-Novartis alliance, but then other organizations and other industry companies got into the game. It looks obviously a lot different now, but this is what it looked like in 2015. And then IPOs in 2015. So lots of interest in this because of the success of therapy, especially in children with ALL. And so there were a lot of IPOs, a lot of money being raised to continue this therapy. So what happened as a result of that alliance with Novartis? One, the Center for Advanced Cellular Therapy was actually built. So they followed through on that. This opened in 2016, and there is about 30,000 square feet of laboratory space. Our goal at Penn is not to become commercial manufacturers of CAR T therapy. However, having that much space allows us to do a lot of different things because, as you're probably aware, when you're working under GMP conditions, you can only handle one product at a time, and so all of this takes up space. And so having 30,000 square feet means that we can have lots of different products being manufactured at the same time. So we can, look at specific CAR-19 targets and then also look at other targets like mesothelin or VEGF, there are lots of different targets out there that are under consideration. And so it also helps in scaling up. So we have in addition to this, we also have another GMP facility that's smaller, does like first in human, phase 1 clinical trials. But once those trials have been proven to be successful, then they can be kind of transitioned over to this larger facility so we can treat more patients. And then there's Kymriah. So Kymriah was approved in 2017. It was the first CAR-T therapy that was approved, and it was approved to treat children up to 25, who I would argue probably not children, but with ALL, with relapsed refractory ALL, and then it received another indication a year or so later to treat lymphoma. And so this was a really big deal, because if you can remember, the first T-cell engineering occurred in 1992. The first patient was treated in 2011, and just short 6 years later to have FDA approval is almost unheard of. So what's the current state of this alliance? Well, it ended in September of last year, and now Penn and Novartis have entered into a more focused, limited agreement for the development, of CAR therapies. However, as a result of this alliance, there are 30 new companies with over 3,000 employees and over $1 billion in investment just in Philadelphia alone. And so Bob Vonderheide, who's the head of the Abramson Cancer Center at Penn, has dubbed Philadelphia Silicon Valley, as opposed to Silicon Valley. He thinks it's very clever. It's really not, but so we have Silicon Valley with over $1 billion of investment in cellular therapy. None of this would have been possible without that alliance with Novartis. There's no way that Penn on its own could have brought this product to FDA approval. The scope necessary, again, with multi-center clinical trials, the regulatory burden, all of that, it's just, and I would say that Penn is very experienced in clinical trials, and we have a large unit dedicated to the regulatory aspects of the trials, to trial being carried out and all of that. However, there's still no way that we'd have been able to do this on our own, not in 6 years. And so this alliance was critical in getting this drug marketed and approved. So what's available now? In addition to Kymriah, there's Yescarta. However, there are over, and this is probably a little bit old, 300 clinical trials that are currently active, currently enrolling for CAR T therapy. And so if we look at clinical trials worldwide, China has the highest number, followed by North America, which again is very important when you look at the landscape for CAR T therapy. As many of you know, there are difficulties in getting this FDA-approved, commercially licensed therapy to patients. It is expensive. There are issues with reimbursement. Hospitals are trying to figure out the correct way to bill for this. Insurers don't want to pay for it. But so that's the bad news. The good news is that it is effective. And so we have to figure out a way to get this therapy to patients. And one of those ways is by clinical trials. And I know there's some thought that perhaps clinical trials may be cutting into the use of the commercial product. I don't think that's the case. I think clinical trials are absolutely important in moving this forward. All right. So this is what the landscape is right now. You can see in the middle, sorry, and I don't have a pointer, there are some currently marketed products. There are those that have INDs filed. And then all along the edge are various types of CAR T therapies that are under development and are in various stages going through the regulatory process. So, we've gone from perhaps 5 years ago to over 100. I mean, it's amazing how fast this has really exploded. Okay, so in summary, academic industry partnerships can move therapy forward at a much faster rate than either one can do alone. Partnerships should not be too broad. I think that's one of the lessons that we learned with our alliance with Novartis, is that they should really be focused with intellectual property being outlined very clearly so everybody knows who gets what. And the other thing is, cellular therapy is not just one thing. It's not just manufacturing. There's a whole process. There's collection process. There's the initial cryopreservation. There's then the genetic manufacturing and all of that. And each part of that process has people who are involved in it and that have developed SOPs and best practices. And when you have an alliance, arrangement, a partnership, you have to take all of that into consideration and make sure that when these alliances are formed, that there's one person speaking, but that one person speaking is speaking for everyone in every area of the chain, of the product chain, so that there are no real surprises. And so again, the company knows what they have the right to, and so does the academic institution. Okay, so I'd just like to thank the people that I work with because they are awesome. And I will be up here in the panel to answer questions afterwards. Thank you.